Just a reminder, Sunday is our special concert. It's really during the sermon time. We'll have a regular service, and then with Cynthia Clausen, who is I think, a very special person. We'll see if I still think that after Sunday. You never know. I realize it's been 40 years since I first saw her, so I've aged, but I don't think she has at all. So who knows? Who knows what she will sound like, but I'm looking forward to it. I want you to, do you have the handout? Everybody get a handout? We have extras. Everybody get a handout? This is the last night that we'll be talking about history. The next 2 weeks are politics. And my plan is that 1 week we will talk about Israel's story. And the other week we'll talk about Palestine's story. So we've got 2 more weeks after tonight. But there's a reason why I think history is important. So that you can understand. Come on in, Shannon. There's a paper right there that you need. So the reason we're dealing with history for the last time tonight is that you can understand the historical context in which this whole thing is set. This did not just pop up overnight. There is a long and important history, and I will, if you're not a history buff, there's some papers right there on that, right there. And actually, we'll pass out the others later, but that one, if you'll give one of those to Lisa. Greg, there you go. Thank you. How'd the job interview go? All right, we prayed for you. All right. So we're going to pick up before the birth of Jesus. In 63 BC, Rome really didn't have a dog in the fight. The Hasmoneans were in power. That was the Jewish ruling class, the family that Herod the Great came from, the dynasty, like the ruling dynasty in England is the Windsors, the ruling dynasty in the Middle East, or in Israel, in Judah actually, in the time of Jesus was the Hasmonean dynasty. But they needed help. And so in 63 BC, General Pompey was more than happy to intervene between these warring Jewish tribes, these warring Jewish family. And so they intervened and established. Rome appointed the new king. So you get what's happened here, right? You wonder how the Romans came in. They came in peacefully. You know, what do they say? The scariest words are from the English language are, we're from the government and we're here to help. The second scariest are, we're from Rome and we're here to help. Herod the Great, that we've talked about endlessly, was the king when Jesus was born. He was the one who had the little boy baby slaughtered. He was put on the throne by his buddy. Herod actually grew up in Rome, and his friend got the Roman Senate, to put him on the throne. And in 6 AD, when Herod died, they stopped talking about the kingdom of the Jews. And they did it because the Jews were so annoying. They were always trying to get Rome to leave. And so they said, we're not going to mess with these kings anymore. We're now going to call it a Roman province of Judea. And you can recognize in English we would say Judea. And Judea. That didn't make the Jews happy. And starting in 63, the Jews began what we call the First Revolt, trying to throw off Roman rule. It ended very badly. In 70 AD, the Romans destroyed Jerusalem. They destroyed the temple, because if you're trying, in the ancient world, if you're trying to destroy a people, you destroy their God, right? And if we can get rid of the temple, then they won't have anything to rally around, and that will work. They destroyed the temple. The last band of Jews escaped to a desert fortress called Masada. I've told you that story, I think, last week. And the last 1,000 Jews died by their own hand at Masada. That was in 73. Emperor Hadrian, remember Hadrian's wall that separated Scotland and England? That same Emperor Hadrian decides that he is going to build a new Roman city, and he's going to call it Aelia Capitolina, not Jerusalem. He's giving it a Roman name. He's giving it a Roman identity. And he decides what I need to do to really get rid of these Jews is just to build a whole new Roman city on top of the old. The temple is gone. And on its place, he decides that he is going to build a temple himself. I don't think that ever happened. There was another Jewish revolt in 132, the Bar Kokhba rebellion. And if you're familiar at all with the Dead Sea Scrolls, there are some documents there related to the Bar Kokhba rebellion. It was disastrous. So Rome is the dominant world power. And the Roman Empire is based where? Rome. But that power did not last forever because a new power, let's see, this is the West, so Rome is over here, and a new world power begins to rise up in the East, in what we now call Turkey, led by a brilliant young general named Constantine the Great, who decides that he is going to take control of the Roman Empire. He is the new power, and he is very successful at that. And he defeats the emperor sitting in Rome of the Roman Empire, and he becomes the Roman emperor sitting in his new capital called Constantinople. And I know how to spell that because I was a religion major in college, and I wrote an entire paper for history of Greek Orthodoxy and misspelled Constantinople the same way every time. So I learned how to spell Constantinople. The other word for Constantinople is Byzantium, Byzantium. This is the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantine Empire was pretty Greek, not Roman, they were Greek. They were led by Constantine from the capital at Constantinople. It was the same Roman Empire, but they moved Rome from Rome to Constantinople, which we now call Istanbul. Constantine did something else that changed our lives. He was the very first emperor to declare that the official religion of the empire is Christianity. And there's a great story where he was heading out the night before the Battle of the Milvian Bridge, where he was going to destroy the armies of Maximian, that he had a great vision, and in the sky, was it a cross he saw in the sky, and heard a voice, "In this name conquer." I have to go back and look all that again. But it was a sign from God. Now, Constantine is not a believer yet, but he declares Christianity. He declares the battle in the name of Jesus, the Christ. He founds the first Christian nation. Although he himself was not baptized until he was on his deathbed, you don't want to get cleaned up from your sins too soon. You might have something yet you want to do before you get all baptized up. But one of the things he did that affects what we talk about in the Middle East is he sent his mother, Helena, and he gave her a lot of Constantinian gold, and he sent her from Istanbul, Constantinople, to the Middle East, to Israel. And he told her, go and build churches on the historic sites from Jesus' life. And she built 4 churches. 2 of them have parts of them still standing that she constructed. That's pretty remarkable. Shannon was in both of them in October. The other 2 are gone. But the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre in Jerusalem are still standing, although they've been modified many, many times. Since then, she started those. When she got to Jerusalem, there was a cemetery there. And in a stroke of pure genius, you have to hand it to the Jerusalem Tourism Commission, because they arranged that Helena herself directed the archaeological dig, and she herself discovered the true cross. How is that for genius? And so the true cross was unearthed, and she said, we must build a church here, and the Church of the Holy Sepulchre was built on that place. What's important about that is we have in the early to mid 300s, we have the very first Christian presence in Jerusalem. To this point, it's not been Christian. In 362, Emperor Julian, a successor to Constantine, ruling out of Constantinople, decrees that he is going to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem on the spot. Remember, this is bare. Nothing is on the spot. He's going to rebuild the temple, and an earthquake destroyed it, and it never happened. So the Byzantines, out of Constantinople, Turks, Christian Turks, are in charge of Israel. And he's using the term Israel as that strip of land that we today call Israel. So the Turkish Christians are controlling it. In 614, the Persians come back. They destroy Jerusalem, and they take everything precious out of the Church of the Sepulchre. And until 750, the Persian Umayyads, coming out of modern-day Iran, they're running the show. In 638, and these are Arabs. Oh, they're Persians, they're not Arabs. They speak Persian, Farsi, they don't speak Arabic. But for the first time in 500 years, Jews are allowed back into Jerusalem. Because while the Byzantine Christians were in charge, no Jews. Can't stay here. But they had a very lax, generous policy, and in 568 years, the Jews come back. Now, there's something very important, and Daryl's going to show us a movie here in just a second. Are you ready, Daryl? Just not quite yet. The top of the old hill is bare. Nothing there but a rock. Without a doubt, this was where the Jewish temples stood, both of them. The one built by Solomon, and the second one built by Zerubbabel and enhanced by Herod the Great. Stood on this rock. And the Jews believe that this is also Mount Moriah, where Abraham took Isaac and intended to sacrifice him there. So you can see the Jews have quite an affinity for this place. But nothing is there. Christians weren't a bit interested in it. Christians had nothing, they had no interest in the Temple Mount. They were interested in the site of the crucifixion and the resurrection. They weren't a bit interested. And so there's nothing there. Until 687, and this Persian Muslim caliph decides that he wants to build a mosque on this spot. Because they come to believe that Muhammad ascended to heaven from this very rock. And somewhere in there, they can show you his footprint, where he took his last step off earth into heaven. Just remember, the Muslim religion, Islam, doesn't start till 600. What's a good date for that, Jack? Yeah. So the first half of the 7th century. So there are Arabs and Persians, but there aren't Muslims. Now there are Muslims. And so what he built a building on top of the rock of the old Temple Mount. And so it became the third holiest site in Islam. Now, fast forward to the late 1800s, especially the first half of the 1900s, a very small minority, but a very vocal minority of Christian who were into prophetic ministry came to believe and interpret the scripture that before Jesus could return, the temple had to be rebuilt. So it's a 5-minute little movie narrated by Benedict Cumberbatch. You know who that is? Sherlock Holmes? Yeah, he's the narrator. And that, so for those folks, dispensational, premillennial, people are just like Charles here. Oh, that's a joke. That's an inside joke. That Dome of the Rock has to come down in order for the new temple, the third temple, to go up. Now, this is a 13-acre platform. The sides have been built up and backfilled, so it's a flat platform. On one end is the very famous Dome of the Rock that you will see and recognize. On the other end is a building called the Al-Aqsa Mosque. And it's a long, narrow mosque. It is much more a regular working mosque. But the building was built by the Knights Templars and the Crusaders during the Crusades. And so I don't remember what this video shows, if it shows both of it. But I want you to understand a little bit about the real estate that we're talking about. Okay, Joe?
To the Muslim world, Jerusalem is the city of the prophets, Abraham, David, and Jesus. Muslims believe that the last of the prophets was Muhammad, and that one night he was taken on a miraculous journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, where he ascended to heaven on a ladder of light. For over 1,000 years, Muslims have linked the Prophet Muhammad's night journey with the stone platform that houses the Golden Dome of the Rock and the mosque at the southern end.
When you go up to the mosque, you leave all the noises and the crowds behind you. You come out to this wide open space filled with birds and trees. It's like you're in another world. Out of all the buildings in Jerusalem, the most beautiful to me is the Dome of the Rock. The Dome of the Rock is actually built over a rock, which we call Al-Sakhra, where we believe Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, rose to the heaven and led all the prophets in prayer.
Built 1,300 years ago, the Dome of the Rock is among the oldest Islamic monuments in the world. But why here, just above the Western Wall? What is it about this site that made it the gateway to God for Muslims? The oldest map of Jerusalem ever discovered shows that when the Muslims arrived as conquerors in the 7th century, they found a Christian city, dominated by the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. It is said they were invited to pray inside the church, but asked instead to be taken to the top of the stone platform to look for their own place of worship. They found it abandoned, filled with rubbish. Only once they cleaned it did they uncover what they were searching for. The large outcrop of bedrock. The object at the center of Jerusalem's sacred stories. Today, the Dome of the Rock guards the ancient stone, where it is believed the Jebusites once worshipped, the temple stood, and the Prophet Muhammad ascended to heaven.
But it's now, so Jack is right, Muhammad never went to Jerusalem historically, but his followers came to believe that he made a mysterious ride. Is that something different? Yeah. I didn't say it was a true story, I just said that's their story. Does that help you understand a little bit about why the Dome of the Rock is a important piece of real estate? And now even in Jerusalem, when they pray toward Mecca. So if you believe that the Dome of the Rock has to come down before Jesus is returned, that's going to be pretty ugly. You can see that that's going to require something quite revolutionary. Any other questions about the Dome of the Rock? Now, it is not the holiest site of Islam. It's the third holiest site of Islam. The Church of the Sepulchre, which is, if you could stand on top of the dome, you could look right over the Church of the Sepulchre. It's not far, maybe 10-minute walk if the streets aren't crowded. Is considered the holiest site in Christendom. If you get into holy sites, then the Church of the Sepulchre is your place. Well, the Persians were kicked out by the Abbasids. And you can see there, the Abbasids overthrew the Umayyads, and the Tulunids overthrew the Abbasids, and then the Abbasids overthrew the Tulunids again, and the Fatimids overthrow the Abbasids, and it's a mess. And it ends in 1071 with the Turks again knocking at the door. But there's another world power. If you think of, by the 11th century, a major military force and world power is the Pope, who has a dream of creating a Catholic kingdom in the Holy Land. And it is the dream that the Christians would reclaim the Holy City and the Holy Land for Christianity. And if you follow the Knights Templar history, you know that they were founded as an order to protect the pilgrims who were coming to Jerusalem. And let me say, all through this time, you still have pilgrims coming and going. Even though other powers are in charge, you have Christian pilgrims and Muslim pilgrims and Jewish pilgrims. Not so much the Jews, but they're still coming and going. The First Crusade is 1096 to 99, and they declare the new kingdom of Jerusalem. How do you say that? Outremer? Who speaks French? I don't speak French. I like French fries, and that's all I know. It means from where we're sitting in France, we're declaring that the kingdom of Jerusalem. But that's very different than we actually are in control of it. In 1099, the Catholics, the Crusaders, take control of Jerusalem, and they kill everybody. Everybody they can catch, Muslims and Jews. The Crusaders say, "This is ours, you can't have it." In 1177, King Baldwin is threatened by the armies of Saladin. Saladin is a great Arabic Muslim general. There's papers right there, David and Robin. And he is knocking at the door, trying to conquer Jerusalem. He is unsuccessful until the 4th of July, 1187, at the Horns of Hattin. The Horns of Hattin are one of the hills around the Sea of Galilee. And there was a decisive battle because, if you watch History Channel, they've always got something about the Horns of Hattin, the battle where the armies of Saladin versus the Crusaders. And the Crusaders were fighting in July in the Middle East in chainmail and armor and helmets, and the Arabs who were locals, they were fighting in cool clothes, light clothes, and there was a great and decisive battle by Saladin over the Crusaders. And in 1187, Saladin takes control of Jerusalem. There will be one other crusade led by Richard the Lionheart. And you remember, while Richard the Lionheart is away, King John is ruling England, and King John is threatened by Robin Hood and his merry band of men in tights, and all of that. Richard beheads 2,700 Muslim prisoners, and he defeats Saladin, but not for long, because there's another world power. The Egyptians, the Mamluks, are coming up out of Egypt, and in 1260 they begin to conquer, and in 1291 they destroy for the last time the kingdom of Jerusalem and the Crusaders, and the dream of a Christian kingdom in the Holy Land is over. 300 years later, 250 years later, the Turks are back. And these Turks call themselves the Ottoman Empire, and they will rule about as long as anyone. They're coming out of Istanbul, Constantinople. Now, these are not Christians, these are Muslims. Coming out of Constantinople, they've renamed the city Istanbul. Selim I conquers the entire area in 1517. His successor, Suleiman the Magnificent, is a great builder. And Suleiman restores the Dome of the Rock. He puts the gold on the top. I don't know if you could see the beautiful Arabic writing on the side. And he rebuilds the city walls. But one of the things he does is the gate on the eastern side of the old city, he bricks it in. Because he knows the prophecy in the book of Ezekiel that Messiah will come from the east, from the rising of the sun, from the east, that's east, from the east, and the Messiah will come through the Golden Gate, the eastern gate, and to this day that gate is bricked up. You cannot go through the eastern gate lest you be the Messiah. In 1604, the Ottomans allow the French to begin to visit these holy places and to send missionaries. And so you have the re-entry of Christian presence in the city. In 1700, there was a Jewish revolt. Judah the Pious, not a revolt. He led 1,000 Jews for the very first time in centuries to start a Jewish compound outside the old city. And so now we have, this is important because now we're going from no Jews to 1,000 Jews. But something this precious, remember we said a couple weeks ago why people want this part of the world? It's the land bridge. Napoleon Bonaparte, if he wants to march 100,000 troops from France around the eastern end of the Mediterranean and down into the wealth of Egypt, he has to control it. He was not successful. The Arab peasants. Now remember, I have been defining the Palestinians as the people who never left. These are the indigenous people who have been there the whole time. And every new group, the Abbasids, the Umayyads, the Tulamids, when they would come in, the local people would intermarry. And so the bloodlines get very confused. Palestinians really, I've never heard one claim to have this pure bloodline. 1834, the Arab peasants revolt against the taxation. These are pretty modern issues, right? And conscription into the army of the Ottomans. And now we have another world power. Here is Western Europe. And they want a piece of the action. And so Austria and Britain and Prussia and Russia sign a convention in 1840. And they make a pact. You Ottomans, based out of Istanbul, you can keep Egypt and Israel, but we want everything else that you control. 1860, so just a year, 150 years ago, the first Jewish neighborhood is built outside the old walls, and by the turn of the 20th century, you have up to 35,000 Jewish immigrants flooding into Syria. Into Ottoman, into the Holy Land. Because Syria, they control all of it. Now, why are they coming? They haven't lived here for centuries. Why are they flooding in? A man named Theodor Herzl is German philosopher, historian, and we'll talk some more about him next week, but he writes a book claiming that what the Jews need most is their own homeland. And he's really pretty open to where that could be. It could be in Ethiopia. There was talk of putting the new Jewish homeland in Austria, but somebody says, well, really, our heart beats to return to Zion. And Zion is one of the names of Jerusalem. We want to go back to Zion. And of course, the Old Testament's full of stories. We'll return to Zion. And we sing, I'm marching to Zion, beautiful, beautiful Zion. This is the dream. And Theodore Herzl is the first to put it in writing and really is given the title the father of Zionism. Zionism is the belief that the Jews are entitled to own this part of the world as their own ancestral homeland. European Christians say that's a great idea. Why don't you go there? Do you hear that? We'll help you. Just leave Germany and Austria and France and all these places that we really rather you not be anyway. And so, yes, we think that is a great idea because really nobody holds clear title to it except those Ottomans. And European Christians began calling this part of the world its old Roman name, Palestina. In English, we say Palestine. Kaiser Wilhelm, in 1898, meets Herzl. It says, congratulations, you're home. This is, as far as the Germans are concerned, why don't you all move today? We'll help you pack. We would just as soon you go, and this can be your new home, and you'll be out of our way. In 1901, the Fifth Zionist Congress in Switzerland decides we're going to start raising money to buy land. Not we're going to conquer. We're going to get money from wealthy Jews around the world, the Rockefellers, the Rothschilds. The Rockefeller wasn't Jewish. He was Protestant. The Rothschild, De Beers, some of these great big old names. We're going to get their wonderful money, and we're going to start buying up land, and we're going to build a brand new city. And in 1909, they begin building Tel Aviv, which means hill. Tel is hill. Aviv, which means spring. So why are they calling their new city Tel Aviv, Spring Hill? Why are they calling it that? Think about that. David? Okay. But this is the new future. This is our new spring, right? This is our new beginning. And Tel Aviv is built on the old city of Jaffa, Jaffa, and it becomes the New York City of Israel. To this day, all the commerce, all the important business, all the headquarters offices, all the great shopping is in Tel Aviv. It's not an ancient city. It only dates back to 1909. But who's getting nervous about this? The Arabs who are living there. They see a growing wave of Jews moving back and bringing money. These are, really, it's immigration issues. We're going to lose our country, and the Arabs don't like the Ottomans either, because the Ottomans are not Jews, they're not Arabs, they're ruling from Istanbul, they're not one of us. And so world powers are moving. And as Europe is moving, Palestine becomes one of the pawns on the chessboard. Because Western powers want a piece of this business. And so we're tired of the Ottomans. We want them to go. Now, the Ottomans have allied themselves with whom? Do you know? The Germans. So the Germans are wanting a piece of this action, and they make pacts with the Ottomans, and they are allies, and the Brits and the French hate the Germans. So if you're a friend of Germany, you're not a friend of ours, so they won't get rid of the Turks. And so Britain and France have a secret pact that when World War I is over, we will destroy the Ottomans and we will trade with all of the Arab states. Egypt, Syria, Lebanon, Jordan, they will be trading partners. Because what are we getting thirsty for? Oil, right? Oil. Yeah. And control of the Suez Canal. Because through the Suez Canal, we're connecting east and west without going around the Horn of Africa. In 1916, the Germans and the Ottomans attacked the British at the Suez Canal. In 1917, there was the British defeat the Ottomans and their allies. They are unsuccessful at Gaza. We talked about Gaza last week. The Ottomans make the Jews leave. You cannot stay here. And so the Jews are evacuated. And they didn't come back for a few years. In 1917, the British government made a declaration called the Balfour Declaration. I've given you the text of it. His Majesty's government, is that King Edward, 1917? Would that be King Edward? Is that right? His Majesty's government's view will favor the establishment in Palestine of a national home for the Jewish people and will use their best endeavors to facilitate the achievement of this object, it being clearly understood that nothing shall be done which may prejudice the civil and religious rights of existing non-Jewish communities in Palestine or the rights and political status enjoyed by Jews in any other country. So, yes, sir. And if we had popcorn in 3 hours, we would watch Lawrence of Arabia, which is this story. So go back and watch Lawrence of Arabia again. Make sure you got 3 hours. Watch it again, and that is this story. That's it. And that's in the movie. He's working with tribes. He's building connections with individual tribes. So all of this is about getting rid of the Turks. We want to eliminate the Turks. We want to be able to trade freely with all of these Arab countries because they have all the oil that we could ever want. And we want to help the Jews because they helped us during World War I. In 1917 was the Battle of Jerusalem, defeated the Ottomans. General Allenby got out of his jeep, or off his horse, I don't remember which, off his horse maybe, and walked into Jerusalem just like Suleiman did. Or Saladin, just like Saladin walked into Jerusalem. He is reenacting. I mean, this is so full of pageantry and history. There was a decisive battle where the Germans and the Ottomans were finally defeated at Har Megiddo, the hill of Megiddo. And in English we say what? Armageddon. You think Armageddon is not every war that has ever been fought in this part of the world has had its decisive battle at Har Megiddo. Is it any wonder that John the Apostle then uses the word Armageddon in Revelation 16 to talk as the place where the last major battle between the forces of God and Satan meet. In 1918, the Ottomans are gone. But who's going to run this place? And the Brits hold up their hand, and they're sorry they did. It was an absolute disaster. Yes, sir. It's a very familiar story. Jack's exactly right. But the Brits say, oh, we'll take control of it. And the League of Nations gave it to Britain. Not to own, but to manage. Okay, you are the managers. And that lasted about 25 years. The League of Nations is gone. The United Nations has come. World War II has been fought. The Jews have been decimated. And the Europeans let it happen. There is no question. The Europeans knew what was happening, knew what the Nazis were doing to the Jews, and they didn't speak up. The Pope did not speak up. And the Arabs to this day say that the creation of the State of Israel is blood guilt by the West for how the Jews were treated during the Holocaust. And on November the 29th of 1947, the United Nations takes a vote, and they create from scratch 3 regions. They create I'm not joking, they took a map and they took a marker. And they said, we're going to call this strip Israel. This strip is going to be Arab controlled, and I don't know if, I need to find out if they put the name Palestine on it or not. They said that's going to be for the Arabs. And then they drew a circle around Jerusalem and said, now this is going to be an internationally controlled city, not unlike Berlin, just that where the international community is going to control Jerusalem. And I want you to look at the bottom. The arrival of many Jewish immigrants in the 1930s awakened Arab fears that Palestine would become a national homeland. By 1936, guerrilla fighting had broken out between the Jews and Arabs. These people were not at war before this. I want you to understand, this is brand new. This is not 2,000 years old. This is a brand new war. Britain cannot control it. And they wish, like everything, they had not said yes. And so they say, 1939, no more Jews. No more Jews can immigrate into Palestine. The Jews, feeling betrayed, opposed the policy, and they looked to the United States. Harry Truman, my own fellow statesman, and Harry Truman was persuaded to recognize the new state of Israel. And at midnight on May 14, 1948, the Provisional Government of Israel proclaimed the new state of Israel, and on that same date, the United States, in the person of President Truman, recognized the Provisional Jewish Government as de facto authority of the new Jewish state. The U.S. delegates to the United Nations and top-ranking State Department officials were angered that Truman released his recognition statement to the press without notifying them first. And on May 15, 1948, the Arab states issued their response, and Arab armies, and that was Egypt, Jordan, Lebanon, Syria, and maybe somebody else, invaded Israel, and the Arab-Israeli conflict began officially in 1948. And there's an interesting footnote on that last page that you ought to look at. Questions? We have 1 minute. Questions? We covered from 63 BC to 1948 in 45 minutes. That's pretty good. And saw a movie to boot. What do you think? Or what are you seeing? One of the reasons, Jack's exactly right, one of the reasons I want you to see this is that this part of the world has just been a ping pong ball against every world power has had control of it forever. And it's still a mess. And so the next 2 weeks, we're going to try to make more modern sense out of what it is. And we'll bring in theology again, but I think you need to understand some of the history in order to understand the modern politics. Yes, ma'am. Listen to us. We have had some diplomats, I think, who had a really good understanding of it. I hope that they're being listened to. We're going to talk next week about the Oslo Peace Accords, the Camp David Accord. These are very, very significant things. And they are very, very important to understand the modern agreements. Well, we're being invaded.